Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this little interaction. More than the lecture series, it is going to be an interaction with you. Initially, we will go, I'll give you an outline as to how we are going to conduct it, and then we will proceed. So, at the outset, I want to thank Dr. Archana Patil, madam, who has got this lecture series together and given us an opportunity to interact with all of you, as well as you will understand that any pandemic approach, it has to be a teamwork. So without teamwork, we are not able to handle anything in our routine practice and leave aside in pandemic situation. So whatever interactions we have, I am just representing the pediatric department of BJ Medical College and all the other hospitals who are attached to us and with whom we interact. And along with this, we have a lot of administrative support and support from our senior faculties as well. So whatever we have prepared is out of experience and the pediatric guidelines, which we have written it with other people from IAP and stalwarts like Padke madam as well as Armida Fernandez madam, who have helped us in formulating the neonatal guidelines. They will all be shared with you after this lecture. So please feel free to get in touch with us if there are any doubts or any suggestions. And along with me today, Dr. Rajesh Kulkarni, Associate Professor. He also looks after the pediatric ICU, and he will take you through the case scenarios which are there so that it becomes more clinical rather than just a lecture series. So I hope with this introduction we can move forward. So can I have the next slide, please? Just to give you a short view is that we designed the pediatric protocol first a long time ago, even before the pediatric cases started coming in. And that time we had data primarily from the Western countries and China. And based on that, we prepared our pediatric protocol, which was actually circulated. Then we revised it, so the IAP members, Dr. Sanjay Bafna, Dr. Sanjay Nathu, Sanjay Lalwani, Dr. Rajesh and myself, we did it and we circulated it. And then the neonatal protocol, as the pregnant ladies started becoming positive and coming to us, and we started getting newborns who were exposed to positive mothers. Madam asked us to do the neonatal protocol, and Dr. Chaya Valvi and Dr. Reema Nagpal from BJ, along with NNF people, Padke Madam, Dr. Armida Fernandez Madam, as well as many other members formulated it. So both these, we have done it, BJ Medical College has taken the lead to get it all compiled, and we will distribute it to you after this session. Next, please. This is our data from our IDSP office in Pune, the pediatric burden, which is there dated up to 23rd. So you'll see that 4% of the total cases that have been reported from the state of Maharashtra are below 10 years of age. Between 10 to 20, it is almost 7%. You will realize that in the initial part of this pandemic, there were no pediatric cases at all. And then when they started coming in, they were mainly because of the contact tracing, that they were exposed to somebody in the household who was positive. And they were typically asymptomatic, happy children who were kept in isolation. Mortality has been very low in children, at least the one which has been reported. We have had 2 cases in Sassoon Hospital who we lost, but they taught us a lot and helped us modify our approach to the patients, as well as how to deal with patients who come to us with comorbidities. Next, please. The question which is always asked is why there are less pediatric cases. And then the answers are various. Nobody knows the exact answer. But these are some of the things, sort of suggestions which have come forward. As you all know, the pediatric patients are developing patients and their immunological system is also not very well developed. So even if they contract the virus, they do not very vigorously produce a cytokine storm. So the way the adult present with many manifestations, children don't, and they remain quite asymptomatic. There is also immaturity of the ACE2 receptors in children, which are responsible in the pathogenesis of COVID infection. When the time of this outbreak occurred, it was usually the summer vacation or it was the winter vacation, and they were actively kept at home because of the lockdown also. So all these things came together, and then there were other theory which has come forward that children are exposed to a lot of other viral infections the whole year around. So there are immunoglobulins which are produced and which may be acting against other coronaviruses, induced immunoglobulins or others, and they may be responsible for a protective nature. So these are just the theories. Nobody knows the exact answers, but we are lucky that our children are not getting seriously affected. Next, please. If you see the clinical presentation, those who have worked during the H1N1 pandemic will realize that many of them can remain asymptomatic, more so with the COVID infection compared to the H1N1. And what we are seeing in our practice over here in Sassoon, that quite a few of them will come with fever, asymptomatic basically, but those who come, they come with fever, cough, sore throat. Of late, we are getting a lot of patients with loose motions as the only presenting complaint. Those who come critical are breathless with respiratory distress. Few of our patients have come with fever, convulsions, altered sensorium. And the poor feeding is especially more common below 12 months of age. The mother will specifically tell about poor feeding. And the last 3 or 4 cases, we have had typical skin rashes with which the patient has come. So if you see for a practicing pediatrician, these are all things which will always confuse with other viral infections, other bacterial infections. So there is no clear-cut symptom which will tell you that this is because of COVID alone. So it's like any other infections, we have to keep an open mind and think of COVID when you are handling such patients in your practice. Next, please. Now, adults have got these categories. We have tried to put the categories as A to E with the asymptomatic, then URTI without comorbidities, category C with comorbidities. Then we have lower infections, but not in failure. And then the E group is the one which is in failure. So in Sassoon, we usually at present handle patients which are from category C onwards. Whereas in the first phase of the pandemic, we used to get a lot of A and B category patients. Over the last 3 months, we have had immunocompromised patients coming in, severe acute malnourished as comorbidity, congenital heart disease. There are certain chronic lung disease, asthma patients, liver disease. CKD patients have started coming in, hemato-oncology. And what is peculiar here in Pune is we get a lot of cases of megaloblastic anemia. We have had infants who have become critical, and we have been lucky enough to get a few of them out of it and discharged. The other ones are sickle, thalassemia, diabetes, etc. So there are, like adults who have diabetes, hypertension as comorbidities. In children, we have more related to congenital anomalies and chronic systemic illnesses which have an origin as a congenital problem. Next, please. This is another entity which we as pediatricians need to keep in mind. And this is a syndrome which is being noted abroad. There are few cases reported in India as well, and it's nothing but like a Kawasaki disease. The presentation is, it has got a specific criteria where there is fever, which is there about 38 for more than 24 hours. And then you should have inflammatory signs as lab evidence, which are CRP, ProCal. So these are all the cytokine storm related inflammatory markers. And the patient is severely ill enough to require hospitalization with multi-system involvement. And more than two systems are involved usually. There is no alternative diagnosis as such, and the patient should have been COVID positive within, say, 4 weeks prior to the onset of symptoms. So these are the criteria which have been given. So we need to keep an eye and see whether we are coming across such patients now that we are into the third, fourth month of the pandemic. So if at all we are having this type of patients, they will start coming now. Next, please. The practical points when we are considering during COVID infection diagnosing, what we have done here in Pune is to formulate a pediatric scoring system which is in the process of being validated, just to assist us as to whom to keep in the general pediatric ward or pediatric ICU and whom to take to the COVID building where we have a separate ICU and separate admission. So we look at a few points like history of contact with a positive patient, residence in the containment zone, is there persistent fever which is going on for more than 2 to 3 days and not responding to the antipyretic, presence of 4 common symptoms which we have found: cough, cold, sore throat, loose motions. And every patient has a saturation done on admission, and if it is less than 94, they are going to get admitted or at least under observation. They have to stay in the hospital. And any patient with comorbidities, we counsel and insist that they stay with us in the hospital. Next, please. We cannot forget other infections while we are managing COVID. And this is the infections which we need to keep in mind. 3 months before the start of the COVID first case in Pune, we used to get all our respiratory cases samples assessed in NIV for other viral infections. And that time we found that patients we were getting of H1N1 influenza, RSV, human metapneumovirus. So keep in mind of other viral infections and not necessarily only COVID. And the bacterial we found was streptococcal infections, and in atypical, quite a few cases of mycoplasma. So these differentials have to always be kept in mind and treated accordingly, along with the COVID-19 infection. Next, please. So I will hand over now to Dr. Rajesh. We didn't want it to become a monotonous one-way talk. So we have got a few cases, 4 or 5 of them. We will be interacting in between. And same way we have 2 or 3 neonatal cases. The management is integrated into it. And we can stop, if anybody has any questions, you can tell the administrator so that we can take it now or we can take it at the end of the session. Okay? So I'll hand over to Dr. Rajesh.
Thank you, ma'am. So we'll start with the first case. So this is an 8-year-old girl who is residing in a slum in containment zone, and the grandfather is COVID positive. The other family members have been tested and they are negative. The child is all right, asymptomatic. Child has been healthy. There is no comorbidity. So the question comes is, shall I admit this child? What investigation should I do? And does this child need any specific treatment? Okay, so if you remember the scoring system that we talked about, so we said, is this patient in contact with a COVID positive patient? So yes, here the grandfather is COVID positive. Okay, and the child is all right, child is asymptomatic. So is this child going to be admitted? You go to the next slide, please. So because this child is in category A, actually there is no need to admit to a hospital. As per the new directives, the child could be admitted in a corona care center. But why not at home? Because the child stays in a slum. So there the social distancing is not going to be possible. So somewhere under observation, the child has to stay. As such, no investigations are necessary. So we are not going to do a hemogram, a chest X-ray or an ECG in this child. primarily because the child is asymptomatic. So we don't need to do any investigations. And except for multivitamin supplements and zinc, we are not going to treat this child. Now, as Madam said, in the beginning of the pandemic, in March and early April, predominantly the pediatric admissions were in this category, so category A, and we did not really need to treat them with any specific medicines. So this was what we found initially. Can we have the next slide, please? So this is now case 2. So this is a 2-year-old boy from a city suburb which is not in containment zone. The father is a healthcare worker. He is working in a private hospital, and this child has fever for 2 days and cough for 1 day. So he's symptomatic. He also has moderate anemia on examination. And when we examined the child, there is no respiratory distress. The chest is clear, but there is a spleen palpable. 4 centimeter soft to firm spleen is palpable. The saturations are all right. On room air, it is 98%. So does this child need admission? Does this child need any specific treatment? Yes, this child will need admission because although we don't have a direct history of contact with a COVID positive case, here the father being a healthcare worker becomes a high risk, isn't it? So he is likely to be positive, and therefore we take it as indirect contact with a COVID case. The child is also symptomatic and there are comorbidities. The child has moderate anemia. So clearly this child will need admission to a COVID hospital. Can we have the next slide, please? So we admitted this child in hospital, and as I said, the father being a healthcare worker is a risk factor, moderate anemia present is a risk factor, and therefore initially we said he is category B, URTI with a comorbidity category B. So we started symptomatic supportive treatment, paracetamol and supplements, and we decided we'll work up this child little bit. So we did a hemogram. The hemogram was showing a hemoglobin of 7 grams per deciliter. WBC count was normal, 10,500. Neutrophils were 40, lymphocytes were 52. Now in adults, there is a lot of importance that is being given to NLR or neutrophil lymphocyte ratio. And the published pediatric literature, however, does not find this as a very useful marker in pediatric cases at least. So there is a disparity between adults and children when it comes to NLR. Now when we say pediatric, right from the neonatal infancy to a 12 and 18-year-old person, we are looking at it, and we know that the lymphocyte count also changes as the age advances. So clearly one cutoff like adults of 3.5 is probably not appropriate for the pediatric age group, and more research needs to be done on what is appropriate cutoff of this NLR for different age groups. The platelet count was normal at 3.5 lakhs per cubic millimeter. Because the child had come with a fever, we did a rapid malaria and dengue test, it is negative. And because the child had a spleen and a moderate anemia, we sent a peripheral smear and found that the child has sickle cells which are present on the peripheral smear. So an electrophoresis later on confirmed the diagnosis of sickle thalassemia in this child. And we did a chest X-ray. Now the chest X-ray showed right parahilar infiltration. Now this child is not tachypneic, but he has infiltrates on the chest X-ray definitely. So the category was then changed to category D. So he has LRTI. He has no respiratory failure, but he has LRTI. The ECG was done, which was showing a normal QT interval. Now, before we give any specific treatment like hydroxychloroquine, we have to get an ECG done. So all admitted patients preferably get an ECG done and look whether the QTC is normal or not. Also, in all admitted patients, it would be a good idea to do a cytokine screen. So is there any hyperinflammatory markers which are present in these children like ferritin, D-dimer, CDH, CPKMB, etc. So all these tests were done and they were quite all right. The LFT, RFT, and the coagulation was normal. Can we have the next slide, please? So we decided to treat this child. Now, specific drug therapy is not available as such for COVID-19, but there are a lot of drugs being investigated for COVID-19. So one of the safer drugs is azithromycin. We have all used azithromycin. It is pretty safe in children, we would say. Also, hydroxychloroquine has been used for years together in malaria. So hydroxychloroquine also we used in this patient. So we started the patient on hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin and oseltamivir. As madam said, H1N1, if you are not doing a test, you don't know if this is H1N1 also. We don't know. And co-infections are known in children. So a study in China, they found that nearly 25 to 40% of children had co-infections with COVID. So mycoplasma was seen, H1N1 was seen. So we cannot just say that I will not give oseltamivir because this is COVID positive. So in the absence of a specific test where you have not ruled out H1N1, I think it is a good idea to give oseltamivir. So this child was given hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin, and oseltamivir. Also because this child had high-grade fever, so we gave amoxicillin and clavulanic acid intravenously. Now suppose you did an ECG and find that the QT is prolonged. Then you cannot give hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin because both these drugs are known to increase the QT interval, and although it is probably very rare, they may cause arrhythmias also. So you don't want that. So the alternative treatment would be to give doxycycline and ivermectin. We have used doxycycline and ivermectin recently in the last 2-3 weeks we are using, and we have not had any serious adverse effects. So if the QT is prolonged, we suggest you go to doxycycline and ivermectin and oseltamivir, of course. Because it is a pediatric patient and we are all pediatricians, we know how important nutrition is. And I think when the child is in hospital, they feel very scared into being in a hospital. A small child is actually very scared, isn't it? And the only person he can talk to is probably his mother or father who is staying with the child. And because they don't have access to homemade food, so nutrition can suffer. I think therefore, as all pediatricians always say, nutrition is very important in treating a disease also. So taking care of the nutrition is important. Contact tracing is important. So here the father was a healthcare worker. We did a swab of the father and he was positive. In fact, 2 more family members tested positive. So they were also isolated. So we have had these family clusters in Sassoon. More than 7-8 families we found where there is a lot of clustering going on. And the largest family we found was 20 people who tested positive in a single family. So contact tracing importance is there. And hydration, we know how important it is. Counseling of the child and the parents. I am saying child also because you have to talk to the child. You have to reassure them that the child is stronger than the virus. We have to tell them that you are stronger than the virus. You will definitely get over the virus. And more than the child, I think the parents are worried. If they are positive themselves, they are worried about their own health. Plus, they are worried that the child may have a bad outcome. So we have to counsel them that in pediatric age group, the outcomes are good. And most parents, then they are able to adjust with this disease. So for this child, we repeated a test on day 5 and it was positive. On day 10, a test was done that was negative. Can we have the next slide, please? So just about the drugs that we have used in this case. So azithromycin, we know it is a macrolide. It is available as a tablet and a suspension. And the dose is standard, 10 milligram per kilogram per day. Once daily we can give for 5 days. Adverse effects are rare, but because we are combining with the hydroxychloroquine, I think we should be worried about arrhythmia. So ECG monitoring is important in these children. If you are using with hydroxychloroquine, raised liver enzymes may be a possibility, so we need to monitor that. Next slide, please. Oseltamivir, I think all of us are familiar with this drug for nearly 10 years now. And H1N1, again in Pune, it was a big outbreak, big pandemic at that time. So a lot of oseltamivir we have used over the last 10 years. We have been using this drug. It's a neuraminidase inhibitor. It is available as a tablet and suspension. So the drug doses and everything is given in the protocol. I think every pediatrician is aware of this. The duration is 5 days. So treatment wise, it is 5 days duration. A lot of children vomit after taking oseltamivir. So the commonest adverse effect is vomiting here. The taste is not very good. It is a bitter drug. Diarrhea is very common with these children. One concern is neuropsychiatric manifestations or neuropsychiatric adverse effects. We have not found it very commonly, although few children complain of headache, and there might be liver enzymes which are deranged. So again, azithromycin also, oseltamivir also we are giving. So liver enzymes need to be monitored. The third drug is hydroxychloroquine. Now, we have not used this drug very commonly. Chloroquine we used to use a lot in the past when malaria was rampant. Now, fortunately, malaria is not that common. But I think this hydroxychloroquine, we can call it a repurposed medicine, which is being used for COVID-19. Although the later on the trials that have been done in the UK, they have showed that it is probably not very good drug to treat COVID-19. There is no pediatric data there. So this is all adult data that says that it is not effective for treatment of COVID-19. But I think the answer is still not very clear, and therefore one may use hydroxychloroquine. It is a very cheap, easily available drug. without much adverse effects. So loading dose is 8 milligram per kilogram, and then 4 milligram per kilogram per dose is given twice daily for 5 days. In neonates, the dosing is not established. So if you want to use it in neonates, you have to be careful. There is one case report from USA. They used it in a 21-day-old baby. So this has to be done on a case-to-case basis by the treating pediatrician, in probably in consultation with a specialist or expert in COVID-19. The adverse effects are nausea, gastritis, diarrhea, and QT prolongation. Again, probably the one we need to worry about is QT prolongation. So monitoring of ECG is very important. Can we have the next slide, please? Now, recently, there was, I think, when I say recent, it is probably around 2 months ago from Bangladesh, data came out that doxycycline and ivermectin was used in adults as a combination for treatment of COVID-19, and they found good results. Now, the paper has, the data is not there. It is not a peer-reviewed publication yet. So we don't know whether it works or not. But if you have a contraindication to hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin, we have used ivermectin and doxycycline in a few patients without any serious adverse effects. So we don't know if it works or not. But if you have problems using hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin, definitely you can use doxycycline and ivermectin. Ivermectin has been used for ages now in children. In vitro, it has inhibition of COVID-19 virus. The dose is 100 microgram per kilogram per dose twice daily. Up to 200 microgram, you can increase the dose if required. Some people are giving it for 2 days, some people are giving it for 3 days. It is available in a tablet form. So it is available as a 12 milligram tablet, and a 6 milligram tablet, and 3 milligram tablet. So we'll have to crush and give. The adverse effects are headache, dizziness, and muscle pain. Can we have the next slide, please? Now, doxycycline, I think in the recent years, a lot of pediatricians are using doxycycline because of rickettsial fevers, which have shown an increase not only in Maharashtra, but I think pan India, there are an increase in the reporting cases of rickettsial infections, and therefore doxycycline now is not a very unusual medicine used in children. Now, as we all know, below 8 years of age, it was supposed to be used with caution because it can cause discoloration of the teeth and dental enamel hypoplasia. However, if you use it for a short duration, like we use for 5 days, we have used it in even in younger children without any problem. So the dose is 4.4 milligram per kilogram per day, divided in 2 doses on the first day, and then 2.2 milligram per kilogram per day as a single dose you can give for 5 days total. And adverse effects I have spoken about. Next slide, please. Now, when a pediatric patient is admitted, madam has already told you, we are not sure if it is only a viral infection or a bacterial infection. Many a times there is a confusion, and we take blood cultures in these patients, and then we start antibiotics for them pending blood culture. So what antibiotics should we use? So we can use ceftriaxone, amikacin. If the child is very sick, you can go directly to piperacillin, tazobactam, and vancomycin. These are the drug doses. We are all pediatricians, so we know the drug doses, but it is always a good practice to check the drug dose and then write it. And very important is give the first dose of antibiotic within 1 hour of admission. Now, a lot of these children, when they come, they fit into the criteria of SIRS, systemic inflammatory response syndrome, and a subset of them will progress to sepsis. And at admission, we don't know who will progress to sepsis. So I think the importance of giving the first dose of antibiotic within 1 hour of admission is very, very important, and all of us should practice this. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think this one, yeah. So this is the second case. I think I will ask Dr. Kinikar madam to summarize what we learned from this case.
There are a few take-home messages from this case. First is that you should be aware a very good pediatric history. Pediatricians are supposed to take a good history, and I think so it is ingrained in our mind that without history you cannot make a diagnosis in pediatric practice. So in this history we saw that the healthcare worker father, who that history has to come. Many times this history is hidden from us because of fear, or in the initial period it is stigma. They don't tell us also. Even if they are positive, they will not tell. So maybe the second day or the third day, if you keep on asking, they will definitely open up and give you the history. The second thing is the spleen was an odd finding in a pure COVID infection. And the diagnosis came from the pathology department. Dr. Kalpana, she almost jumped up and called me up and said, I am seeing sickle cells there. So if this collaboration with other departments, like generally when you have a COVID patient, you are just interested in the hemoglobin, WBC count, and that platelet count. But the peripheral smear becomes very, very important. And then this patient subsequently had problems. Our residents have really worked hard on this patient and got the child out of all those critical phases, and the child has gone home. But the diagnosis could be made by a peripheral smear and then we worked on it. Also, sometimes there is always a criticism that are you over treating these patients, because it looks like almost like a polytherapy. But when in the pandemic situation, the aims are very different. It's not like our routine general pediatric practice. Here, your aim is to get the baby settled down, stabilized, and take care of the patient as much as you can in a short period of time. And we don't want any mortality in these patients, because if you see, there is no specific treatment. We are just using drugs that have been in with us, but not for the indication of COVID. We have treated patients now in Sassoon, got good results. So even if people criticize, we are going to continue this, and maybe we can put forward a publication with our experiences on use of these drugs. So each pediatrician has to think and then manage the patients. All the guidelines which we make are dynamic guidelines. New research comes in, new guidelines from the government come in, and we have to modify our protocol. So we will be doing that time and again. So these two things which came to my mind, I thought I will add it now. And if you have any questions, you can jot it down, because in the next 1 hour which we have, we are going to discuss other questions, which in half an hour question answer session. Yeah, next please. You can move on to the next.
Thank you. Now this is the third case we are discussing. Now this is a young baby who is 11-month-old, and the mother was diagnosed as COVID positive. They come from a containment zone, and the child had fever for 3 days, cough for 2 days, poor feeding since 2 days, and the baby has not passed urine for the last 24 hours, and the baby is very irritable. These are the complaints of the mother. Now the history, pre-morbid history is also significant. This baby was a small for gestational age baby, 1.7 kilo, was in NICU for 5 days, but in the panic of this COVID, the mother has not brought any NICU discharge card or anything, so the details are not known at that time of point. And we have the next slide, please. So on examination, this child is very irritable. His heart rate is 150 per minute. The respiratory rate is 64 per minute. The pulses are 3D. The peripheral pulses are 3D. The cap refill is deranged. It is more than 3 seconds. There is severe pallor. There is hyperpigmentation of the hands and feet. The tongue is dry. The saturation on oxygen is 94%. And there is intercostal and subcortical recessions which are seen. Now this irritability, we have seen that a lot of infants who are COVID positive are very irritable. Now the exact cause is not known. We don't know why they are so irritable. But if we compare non-COVID cases, infants with COVID infants, we've had about 4 or 5 cases now in this age group, and they are all irritable. So irritability seems to be a marker probably, or we can say a common finding at least in COVID cases. And we have the next slide, please. Now this is a severely malnourished child. So the weight is only 5.2 kilos. The length is 58 centimeters and the mid upper arm circumference is 11 centimeters. Now all pediatricians, they are all aware of SAM, and we know that the treatment changes. If the child has SAM, the treatment protocol changes. So always it is a good idea, I think, to jot down the weight, even if this is a serious condition, the child is bad. Still, monitoring of weight and having a mid upper arm circumference taken is easy. It doesn't take time. And I think we diagnosed the SAM here with severe anemia. And probably we said this anemia is megaloblastic in origin. The pulses are 3D, the CRT is prolonged. Obviously, the child is in shock. Can we have the next slide, please? So initially what we did was we started the patient on oxygen by high flow. Now we tried IV access, 3 residents were trying and it failed. So within about say 5 minutes, we said this is not working, let us get an IO access. So we got an intraosseous access. We resuscitated as per the SAM protocol. In the next slide, we'll show you what the SAM protocol is like and fluid resuscitation. The child was a little cold, so we had to arrange a room heater to increase the child's temperature, heat up the child, warm up the child. The glucose, which was done by glucose sticks, was fortunately okay. It was 78. And as soon as we got an IO access and we gave fluids, we gave the first dose of antibiotics. I just discussed what is the importance of giving an antibiotic early. And here, because the child was young and very sick, so we directly started with piperacillin tazobactam. We did a urinary catheterization immediately. Now the history is that the baby has not passed urine for 24 hours. So I think all of us who work in critical care are aware how important the input-output charting is. So urinary catheterization was done. Now we cannot rely on IO for a long time. Intraosseous access doesn't work for a long time. So immediately we obtained a central line. Now in another child, not this child, but in another child who was in shock and who was COVID positive, we could not even get a central line access and we had to call our pediatric surgeon who did a cut down. So access can be a problem. So we have to have a team of people who are trained in central line, who are trained in cut down. I think it is very important to have this teamwork there. And because this child was in shock, cold shock, we started adrenaline infusion. Next slide, please. So this is a sample of a monitoring chart that we are using in Sassoon. So we can see we are monitoring heart rate, respiratory rate, SpO2, peripheral pulses, central pulses. If the child is on ventilator, the ventilatory parameters, the cap refill, the blood pressure, the input output, abdominal girth. Is the child on feeding? Then we are writing the feeding. We are monitoring the BSL. So this is the basic monitoring chart that goes into each child who is admitted to COVID building. So it's very important to do the monitoring of these children. Next slide, please. So I said this child was started on high flow. So this is a part of your non-invasive ventilation. Now, initially when COVID pandemic started, everybody said non-invasive ventilation should not be used much because there is aerosol generation and the healthcare workers will be at risk. So there was a lot of emphasis on using invasive ventilation, and then people understood that non-invasive ventilation, people who are on NIV are surviving more than invasive ventilation. So the trend has now changed completely, and non-invasive ventilation is being tried before the child deteriorates or before the person deteriorates to such an extent that invasive ventilation is absolutely required. So if the child has moderate RD, we straight away go to non-invasive ventilation. Options you have of CPAP or high flow oxygen, high flow nasal cannula. The flow can be 2 liters per kilo. The FiO2 can be up to 0.6. One point is over the prongs, you can use a surgical mask to reduce the aerosolization. You can do that. And in infants, in small children, you can put them on a hood. In the good old days, we used to put them in a hood and give oxygen. So here you can put them on high flow and then put them on the hood. That can be done. And this should be tried at least for 2 hours. If there is improvement, we continue. So monitoring is important. Nothing in PICU is static. It changes. It's a dynamic situation. If there is deterioration after 2-3 hours, we can take a call and invasively ventilate the child. But if the child is improving very much, we should continue on non-invasive ventilation. Next slide, please. Now these are the drug doses. I'm sure all of us are aware of this, but this is a table, little table, which is there in the protocol. In the pediatric protocol, this table is there. So all the important drugs, these are kept in a crash tray, ready to give anytime you require it. We should be able to give these drugs. So these are the drugs that are there: adrenaline, noradrenaline, dopamine, dobutamine, atropine, hydrocortisone, glucose, calcium, gluconate, and ketamine. These are the common ones. We have used milrinone also. So we can use more drugs, but these are the absolute bare necessary drugs that has to be there in the crash trolley. Next slide, please. So like I said before, this child had SAM and he was in shock. So we followed this protocol of SAM with shock and we gave this child 15 ml per kilo over the first hour. We monitored the child. The child required one more dose of 15 ml per kilo over 1 hour. We reassessed the child and the child improved to some extent, and therefore then we started the child on IV maintenance course. Next please. Now suppose this child was not a SAM child, then we standard PALS protocol of shock we can follow. where we have 0 to 5 minutes, 5 to 15 minutes, 15 minutes to 60 minutes, and post 60 minutes action. So I think all of us are aware of this, how to divide this shock as cold shock, warm shock, what medications to use. If it is a refractory shock, what to do. So this is the standard shock protocol that all PICUs follows, and we have followed it in a few patients we dealt with in the COVID building also. Next slide, please. So we'll come back to our case. Now, when the hemogram came, the hemoglobin was just 2.2 grams per deciliter. The WBC count was high, it was 13,000. Now here, again, as I said, neutrophil lymphocyte ratio was just 0.28. So lymphocytes were predominant, the neutrophils were less. And yet this is a very severe disease. So again, the importance is because the lymphocyte count is so variable and dynamic depending on the age of the child, do not take that 3.5 what we know in adults as a gospel truth here. In children, it is different. The platelet count was low. It was 1.05 lakhs per cubic millimeter. A peripheral smear, like Madam said, the importance again, immediately before we got the B12, we know that this is B12 deficiency, hypersegmented neutrophils, macrocytes. The bilirubin was a little high, 2.1 milligram per deciliter, of which indirect was a major fraction. And we all know that in B12 deficiency, you can get little bit of indirect hyperbilirubinemia. The PT-INR was deranged here, and I think this is very important because it tells you how sick the child is. It tells you there is a coagulopathy. It tells you the seriousness of the condition. So this PT-INR was deranged here. It was 2.1. So the first X-ray we did, we found bilateral patchy infiltrates. You can see the X-ray, and the ABG was showing metabolic acidosis here. And despite the child being tachypneic, the PCO2 was 40, which is actually high compared to the respiratory rate of the child. This is high PCO2. It may be in the normal range, but this is high PCO2 for the child. The child was severely hypoxic. You can see the PO2 of 70 on a FiO2 of 0.6. So the PF ratio was very low. It was in the ARDS range. And meanwhile, the RT-PCR for COVID came as positive. Next slide, please. So these are the other tests that we did, and we found very high ferritin levels. And I think the first level was some 1700. We said, what is this? This is very high level. We had not seen such a high level in a young baby before in infections. And we repeated it, and to our surprise, it was even more. So 1976 was the ferritin of this child. The CRP was positive. The D-dimer was deranged. Triglycerides were high. B12 was low. The sodium was little low. Potassium was on the lower side. The blood culture, urine culture were all sterile. So we found that there was evidence of hyperinflammatory syndrome in this child. So what we discussed, multi-system involvement in this child is there, and therefore there is a lot of inflammation going on in this child's body. So next slide, please. So other management that we did for this child, now this child is only 5 kilos weight. So we had to titrate the IV fluids accordingly. Fortunately, after giving resuscitation, the child started passing some urine, although the urine output never went to beyond 0.8 ml per kilo. So the child was not anuric, but always remained olivuric. Blood transfusion was given because the hemoglobin was just 2.2. So 5 ml per kilo, we gave slowly. Now in a megaloblastic anemia, unless the child is in cardiac failure, it is almost always a dictum not to transfuse this child. Then why this child was transfused? Because this child had tachycardia also, because this child had mild hepatomegaly, and we were considering that this child might be in early cardiac failure, and the anemia was very severe, and it was impacting the oxygenation. So therefore, we wanted to raise the hemoglobin of the child, and we gave 5 ml per kilo of fat cells. We started vitamin B12. We started hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. Next slide, please. Now, when we did a repeat hemogram, we found that the hemoglobin had increased little bit, but the WBC had fallen considerably. So it was only 2000, and serial counts were done, and the lowest hemoglobin was 2.2, the lowest WBC was 1000, and the lowest platelets were 10,000 per cubic millimeter. So this child had severe bone marrow suppression. So the child's bone marrow was not responding at all. So we thought, what is this? Is this infection associated HLH? And therefore we did a bone marrow. Now the bone marrow report came actually after the child died, but we considered this as a clinical diagnosis, and we gave IVIG and methylprednisolone for this child. Next slide, please. So over time, the child's respiratory distress worsened. The urine output became poor, so the child went into acute kidney injury also. And the chest X-ray worsened. You can see the bottom X-ray, it is showing bilateral diffuse ARDS pattern. The PF ratio was just 50. We intubated, ventilated the child. We had to go to high pressures, high FiO2. We tried everything, proning the child, CARP protocol. But on day 6, this child had a massive pulmonary hemorrhage and the child died. Next slide, please. Little about the CARP protocol or the proning. So this is what is followed in adults. So we may not be able to follow this exactly, but this is the protocol. So left and right lateral recumbent position, sitting upright. Now this is only possible if the child is not on a ventilation or not on invasive ventilation. Sitting upright, proning, and Trendelenburg is, a few people have tried even Trendelenburg. Now in adults, they say that all conscious people should do this. And probably all children also, I think we should be trying the CARP protocol. So 15 minutes after each position change, we must check whether the saturation is okay. It's very important to monitor the saturation, especially if the child is ventilated, the endotracheal position may change. It's not easy to give prone position to a child who is ventilated to change to supine. In all this change of position, you may have dislodgement of the endotracheal tube. So it's very important to check the position of the endotracheal tube. Next slide, please. Now, mechanical ventilation, this is there in the standard protocol that we have given. So rate, we all are usually, ventilation for us is usually pressure ventilation. We don't use volume ventilation much. At least in our PICU, we use more pressure ventilation. If you are comfortable using volume ventilation, even that is good. But we are more exposed to pressure ventilation. So depending on the child's age, the rate, PIP, PEEP will be there. If you are using volume ventilation, the tidal volume should be low, 5 to 8 ml per kilo. FiO2 has to be titrated as per your PF ratio. One important thing to know is that we don't expect a PO2 of 100 or 80 or 120. We have to be happy with little lower PaO2s in these children because their lungs are stiff. So we are not going to get a good PF ratio or a SF ratio. So FiO2 has to be, as the child tolerates, we have to decrease it. Initially you may give 100%, but later on you need to decrease it as tolerated. Then very important is to give head elevation to the child because this decreases the chances of VAP also. Prone positioning we already discussed. We have to sedate these children. Sometimes they tend to fight a lot, but paralysis is not required many a times. I think there is a tendency to paralyze children, and we are not in favor of doing that. We prefer light sedation as required. We prefer inline suction in these children because otherwise there's a collapse that happens. With standard VAP and collapse prevention bundles we need to follow. Early nutrition is very, very important. For pediatricians, we know the importance of nutrition in recovery from a disease. So early enteral nutrition is important. Early mobilization position change is also very important. Next slide, please. Now I would ask Madam to just highlight a few things that we learned from this case, please.
You must be wondering why we showed you a case where unfortunately we lost the baby. But this baby taught us a lot of things, that never give up on your patients. We could handle this patient for almost 5 days and we thought the baby was improving with whatever we were doing. And that was a stage when we had not gone to the level of using ivermectin, and we used hydroxychloroquine because that was the one for which we had permission that time to use it. The second important thing which this patient taught us is how to take care of COVID positive patients in a place where you are surrounded by all adult positive patients and our little baby is over there. And there is actually the temperature management becomes very important here. We had to bring in a warmer for this baby because they are usually in shock. So the basic pediatric care has to be simultaneously continued when you are doing the intensive care. Don't forget the pediatric care, which is the general care, nutrition, etc. Always don't forget the caretaker, because the caretaker in this case was the mother who was negative, but she was on hydroxychloroquine prophylaxis and the medicine people were looking after her. So counseling was very important because she was seeing herself what is happening to the baby. They don't leave the baby to you care. They just refuse to leave the baby. So simultaneously caring for the caretaker is what we need to lay more stress on. as well as even if the outcome is poor, if you have handled the patient systematically and you have given a feedback to the parents, these are the same parents who came back to us after 15 days and thanked us for looking after the baby, surrounded by about 70 positive patients, everybody in those gowns and those PPEs, they don't understand who we are. So don't forget all these aspects also. This case has been published in IJP because we thought people should know about it, and we are thankful for the permission given to us to write in detail about this, so you can read it in the IJP journal as well. So I'll ask Rajesh now to move on quickly to the remaining cases because we are finishing almost an hour. So we move on to the newborn cases. Which are there.
Thank you, ma'am. So now the next two cases are newborn cases. Now, in the initial phase of the pandemic, we never thought we'll require so much neonatal care during this pandemic. During H1N1, we had a few mothers who were H1N1 positive and we managed their babies. But this time, I think there are too many COVID positive mothers. That is what our experience is. I think nearly 65 COVID positive mothers have delivered at Sassoon. That's a big number. So this is the first case and the fourth case in the series, but the first neonatal case. So this is a 23-year-old mother. Herself, she's a case of Sari. She delivered in a COVID building. So we have a COVID building where we have a separate labor room. So she delivered there. Day one test of the baby is negative. Now we always do test on day one and day five, and the first day test is negative. So we shifted this baby to isolation baby room in a separate building. So we have a COVID building and we have a non-COVID building where these babies are taken care of. Now the mother is sick; she is not herself well, so she cannot take care of the baby. So this baby is shifted to isolation room, and there is no caretaker available. Unfortunately, no relative was available. I think people were so scared at that time that they didn't want to come and take care of the baby. So the nurses and residents look after this baby. Next slide, please. So what about feeding? Now for newborn, it is very important. Feeding is very important. Fortunately, we have a human milk bank from which we got donor human milk, but it was not sufficient. The first 2-3 days it was sufficient, but later on the requirement increased and we had to go to formula feeding also. Then the mother, when she was getting better, we gave her a breast pump to prevent engorgement. Day 5 swab came negative, and by that time the relatives arrived and they took the baby home. The mother was discharged on day 14 and she established lactation. So very important message is, even if the mother could not feed the baby for the first few days, establishment of relactation can and should be done. It's very important. So this baby followed up with us and the baby is doing very well. Mother is also all right and there is weight gain. Next slide, please. Now, this was the case which taught us again a lot. Yes, ma'am.
This एक आधीच्या slide वर. You must be wondering that why we didn't keep the baby with the mother, because WHO, Government of India, NNF and everybody, we all agree with breastfeeding is really good for the baby. So first thing, when it is possible and mother is stable, we go for breastfeeding. But in this case, the mother was shifted to the COVID ward. And in the COVID ward, they all are surrounded by positive patients, and there were not much people who could have helped the mother at that stage of the pandemic situation. So this was in the initial phase where the mother needs little support because she herself is ill, and that is the only reason why the option of donor human milk and formula was there. But if the mother is fit enough, she can breastfeed after taking all due precautions by hand washing, wearing a mask, and the contact with comes with the baby. She doesn't cough on the baby, etc. So if that is possible, the breastfeeding can be continued. But in the present situation with two different places and no caretakers, sometimes we are having these other options available as well. So the dictum remains that breastfeeding is best, and we have checked a few samples of breast milk to see for the virus, and about 3 of the samples we were not able to detect the virus. We have also checked the follow-up of the mothers with looking at the breast milk, and there is no virus that is excreted into the milk so far on the limited samples we have checked.
Thank you, ma'am. So the next case is a little challenging. So this was a 28-year-old mother who was COVID positive, and a 37-weeker baby, 2.7 kilos, delivered by LSCS, emergency LSCS, for fetal distress and thick meconium staining. The baby required resuscitation at birth. Endotracheal intubation was required. And before we got the swab reports, we had to manage this baby in the baby room, COVID baby room. So we have created a COVID baby room next to the COVID OT, COVID OBGY OT, and there this baby was ventilated. So the baby tested, so we tested the baby, and fortunately the baby was negative. So because the baby was requiring invasive ventilation, we immediately shifted the baby to neonatal ICU. Next slide, please. So in the NICU, this baby had a very stormy course. The child had culture positive sepsis, Klebsiella. There was meningitis. The child had seizures, bilateral pneumothorax, required ICD. And day 5 swab that we sent routinely, that came positive. So this child, day 1 swab was negative, day 5 swab was positive. So we shifted the baby back to COVID ICU. Now because this baby is COVID positive, we shifted the baby back to COVID ICU. The surrounding babies, we did a swab and they were all negative. Except for serum ferritin, the other inflammatory markers were okay. This baby was then subsequently extubated on day 7, but required oxygen and OGT feeding till day 24 nearly. And after which, after 4 days, I think we discharged the baby home. Recently, the baby went home. Next slide, please. These are some of the X-rays, and I think on the third X-ray, bottom left, you can see the ICD, which is in situ. So this baby had a very stormy course. Next slide, please. So at discharge, this baby was breastfeeding and COVID negative. We had a follow-up also. The baby is doing well, weight gain is there, feeding is good, and we've advised this baby to be followed up in high-risk neonatal OPD because of the birth asphyxia and possible consequences, neurological consequences. I think I'll ask Madam to talk a little bit about this case.
So we are getting, now that ICMR has made it compulsory to do the swab, COVID swab for all pregnant mothers about 5 days before the delivery. And at Sassoon, with around 30-35 deliveries per day, we have started implementing this, and we are getting totally asymptomatic mothers who are coming COVID positive. So the burden of how to and where to handle these babies, we need planning for it. So we are lucky enough that our administration has helped us with having a separate small baby room with all facilities, even ventilators we can use over there, as well as we have gotten a different room in the mother's side, where we have 5 beds which we have kept separate so that they don't mix with the regular NICU babies also. And this needs to be done now because we will start getting more and more of such cases. Most of them are asymptomatic. We do get a few ones like the one we showed you, but otherwise feeding is something which one needs to decide on these cases. And I think so they do relactation after a gap of 10. Initially it used to be 14 days. Now mothers, if they are well, can go home on 10th day. Or if they have a support, they can, even in the COVID ward, they can do breastfeeding, which we have now started doing it for some of our babies whenever it is possible. So we have tried to present you these cases and to make it more clinical rather than theoretical. And we will just touch upon the few newer drugs which are there, because we have used them, some of them, and we have got good results. So we would like to share it with you as well. So I'll hand over to Rajesh now.
So we know that the coronavirus, the MERS virus and the current SARS-CoV virus, there is some overlap with the HIV virus. So structure or some proteins are similar. So therefore this was proposed that lopinavir-ritonavir combination may work in COVID also. Definitive efficacy is not proven. Research is still, trials are still underway. So we don't know if it works or not. So this drug can be used above 14 days of age. The dose is given there, 16 milligram per kilogram per dose twice daily. we have used this drug only in one baby till now, and that baby did well. So we don't know if it will work in all babies, but in one baby we've shown that it works well. Next slide, please. So this is, I think, the drug that everybody is talking about now. And remdesivir was earlier not available in India. Now Cipla and Hetero have got a license to produce this drug. And I think by as early as next week, probably we'll start getting remdesivir supply. And although there are no published phase 3 trials, it is supposed to work well in mild and moderate cases. So the duration of hospital stay may go down a little bit. So far we have not used this drug at all in pediatric age group, but we are hoping that if it is available, we'll try it at least in moderate cases. The pediatric dose is given there 5 milligram per kilogram IV on day 1, and then 2.5 milligram per kilogram every 24 hours, so 5 days. So that is the dose of remdesivir. So far we don't have any experience with remdesivir. Next slide, please. So the next drug a lot of adults are talking about is tocilizumab, which is an interleukin-6 inhibitor. Now this cytokine storm is probably what is killing some adults and children, and therefore this tocilizumab has come to the fore. So this is proposed to reduce the cytokine storm in COVID-19. Obviously there is hepatotoxicity which is known with this drug, has to be used very carefully. Now, we have not used tocilizumab, but there is one case report from South India where they've used this in an 8-year-old boy, and they used in a dose of 8 milligram per kilogram, single dose they have used, and that baby, that child survived. So probably there is a role of tocilizumab in pediatric age group also. However, I think we need expert advice before we use tocilizumab. We need to lot of things need to be ensured, like whether the renal function is normal, the liver, how is the liver, is the person bleeding or not, what is the platelet count. So there are some contraindications, and if these are not there and the child or the person is progressing to a cytokine storm, I think tocilizumab has a role there. Next slide, please. Now we have used enoxaparin recently in many patients. Now adults are using enoxaparin. In each case they are using enoxaparin, and either you use once daily or you use twice daily, depending on whether you want it for prophylaxis or for treatment. It is given subcutaneously, and we have found that patients have not had any severe adverse effect. The only contraindication is the child is active bleeding or platelet count is below 25,000. But otherwise, I think as pediatricians, we don't use enoxaparin so much, because unlike adults, our children are mobile. They don't get so much DVT. But I think during this pandemic, probably enoxaparin will be used in pediatric age group also. And whatever little experience we have, we used it in about 10 patients so far, and we have not found any adverse effects. Probably we should be using enoxaparin is our recommendation for now. Next slide, please. I think I'll ask Madam to talk about these take-home messages, very important.
So we have completed a very brief overview of our experiences at Sassoon. But the take-home messages is that if you remember, the pediatricians were out of the picture because there were no pediatric cases. And they used to tell me, "Tumcha ta kaich nahi hai ithe," so there is no need for you to do anything. But what we did during that period is we planned everything that someday pediatric cases are going to come. So right from the neonatal care, the pediatric ward and everything was planned. Also the ventilators, etc., duties of the residents, and also this pandemic has taught us how planning is very important, and it is helping because after the first two babies we lost, we realized that we need to keep on changing our things and learn the lessons we learned. We had to incorporate it as well as share it with the others. Now, severe type of COVID is uncommon. That is what people talk. But the way the patients are coming to Sassoon Hospital, I don't think so. Severe COVID is not that uncommon. It is common. Only thing what is required is once you make a diagnosis, once you have the lab report, or sometimes even before the lab report, we need to manage aggressively like how we manage our other patients in the regular ICUs. And the main thing is oxygenation and appropriate fluid therapy. Now, ventilation is something which we try to avoid, but some of our babies who have gone on ventilator also have come out. So it is basically the care which is given for a ventilated patient along with early initiation of treatment. So sometimes you feel that patient is asymptomatic. Why give these drugs which are of not recommended or they are not tried in pediatrics? But we have been a little bit aggressive, and that has helped in giving us very good outcomes. So the ones who come to us critical, like adults also, we have seen that they are critical with some comorbidities. The children who are healthy also can be in a moderate infection stage. So if we catch them at that stage in the moderate, we can prevent them going into the progressive stage. And the next important message is about newborns. So newborns can get infected. They can also become critical, and they need the same delicate care that we give in our NICU. Our NICU is 100% occupied. Dr. Chaya, Dr. Nagpan, and the whole set of residents who are there, they are doing a wonderful job over there. But sometimes when you have undetected babies who become positive on day 5, everybody goes into a panic mode. But now we have all settled down, and planning for a separate management of these babies also has given a lot of less stress to our NICU people also, as well as it's all a teamwork. So form your team so that you can give good results to the patients. And even if you lose a patient, still we keep all channels open with the relatives, the parents. They need your support. So even if we have done everything, they are watching you. So they know that the doctors have tried everything, and they don't go away with a bad feeling about it. They do appreciate your work. So try your level best and don't give up on the patients, because you can definitely get good results. And that's from our own experience here at Sassoon. Next, please. Uh, at the end, I would, besides thanking Dr. Archana Patil Madam and the administration from the Department of Health Services, my sincere thanks to our Honorable Secretary of Medical Education, Dr. Sanjay Mukherjee Sir, Dr. Lane Sir, our Honorary Director, Honorable Director, and our Dean, Dr. Tambe Sir. Without their support and their constant guidance, we have many video conferences with our Honorable Secretary and Honorable Director, and every VC adds something and motivates us to do and put in our best. And at the same time, all the departments, anesthesia, medicine, the lab support, microbiology is the key department based on whose reports we run the show here, and also the administration on the hospital side. So before we end and open up the session for question answers from you, I thank you all for being patient listeners. Thank you. It's a question answers. Oh, yes. So if there are any questions you can put forth, we will try to answer as much as we can. सुरुवातीपासून होस्ट ओपन करा ना. Yeah, so are there any questions, or we can look at
Hello, ma'am. Dr. Patil. Dr. D.N. Patil here.
हा बोला सर.
मी स्वतः पॉझिटिव्ह आलो आहे, त्याच्यामुळे आय एम हॅव्हिंग होम आयसोलेशन. पण मी आय जॉईन फ्रॉम माय होम. आणि इट वॉज एक्सलंट प्रेझेंटेशन आणि हेल्पफुल फॉर टू अस हे. थँक्यू मॅम.
स्वतःची काळजी घ्या, लवकर बरे होऊन परत जॉईन व्हा.
हो, थँक्यू. थँक्यू मॅडम, थँक्यू.
ओके.
Nice to hear you. Thank you, ma'am.
There are certain questions which I can read. You want the PPT to be protocol. Okay, so what we will do is we will share the protocol as well as this PPT with IIT Pune branch, and they can then circulate.
Recording in addition.
Again.
We have some technical
Hello, ma'am.
problems.
Can I ask a question, Dr. Kinikar, ma'am?
Yes, yes, go ahead. You just
Yes, ma'am.
identify yourself.
All critical patients, pediatric patients coming to our hospital, if some of them are coming from containment hotspot areas, while others are not, and you know the general figures from Nagpur, we are not in such a bad situation as Pune and Mumbai. So in this scenario, those patients who are coming from non-containment areas, should they also be tested for COVID, and should they be admitted in COVID wards awaiting their report of COVID testing? Please reply, ma'am.
Yeah. So each hospital is different in their COVID and non-COVID buildings. So if you have a separate, entirely separate non-COVID and the COVID building, then we have seen that some of the patients who have tested negative first, if we admit them in our general ward and they are not improving, and then they start deteriorating, and in the early phases, when we had no guidelines for taking swab, when we took the swab, it came positive. So by that time, then everybody was in a panic mode that we have got exposed to these cases in the non-COVID area. So what we have done is we have made a small room where we examine these patients. We are just validating one score now, and depending on the factors, like are they from non-COVID, COVID area, we have scored them, and we have tried to keep them awaiting the report in the COVID building. One floor is for suspected cases. So it is our hospital structure that we have got a place for COVID suspect and then the positive, definite positive. So in that we have made a separate pediatric place where we try to keep them separately and manage them. If they are positive, they stay onto the side of the COVID positive. If they are negative, then we take them into our general pediatric side. But again, in that PICU, we have made a separate room so that they are not exposed much to the others. And as far as possible, we try to segregate them. But I know it's a difficult situation. You can weigh the pros and cons and the facility available and then decide about it. Yeah. There was one question about vaccine in the box. Now, there are many vaccines which are undergoing trial, but as you are aware, even if the vaccine comes out, by the time it is tested, approved, and comes into the market, it is going to be not before November or December. And as of now, at least in Sassoon, we have not undertaken any vaccine trials because that has not reached that stage of newer vaccines being tried out, because that stage is still in the laboratory phase.
Okay, yeah.
Want to be put on the SNCU group. I think we can do that.
Yeah,
Presentation,
some of you want the presentation on the Maharashtra SNCU group. So we will do that, and the approved neonatal protocol is also signed and come back. So we will put both of them. I will ask the, you can share it, isn't it? I will ask the office of Archana Patil madam to please share it, because both the protocols are with them. They have been approved by the principal secretary, and we will share it with you. This one.
Along with annexures.
You have shared it with everyone.
You can do it. First time I get added annexures.
Okay. अजून कुठले ते खाली स्क्रोल केलं तर
खाली खाली press होतं.
ते कोल्हापूरचं आहे ना.
हा मॅडम, माझा प्रश्न असा आहे की आपण आता 7व्या 8व्या 9व्या दिवशी जर सिम्प्टोमॅटिक पेशंट असेल बेबी, तर आपण डिसाईड करणं अपेक्षित आहे ना 7व्या 8व्या 9व्या दिवशी बेबी.
तर आवाज येत नाहीये बरोबर.
कोविड पॉझिटिव्ह बेबी 7व्या 8व्या 9व्या दिवशी असिम्प्टोमॅटिक असेल तर त्याला आपण विदाउट टेस्ट करणं डिस्चार्ज करणं अपेक्षित आहे का?
डिस्चार्ज. अच्छा, आम्ही काय करतो, जर बेबी एसिम्प्टोमॅटिक असेल, पॉझिटिव्ह आहे पण एसिम्प्टोमॅटिक आहे, तर ICMR च्या गाईडलाईन्स आहेत आता की जेव्हा आपण पॉझिटिव्ह आहे एसिम्प्टोमॅटिक आणि त्याला घरी पाठवतो आहे, तर वी हॅव टू टेक अ लिटल हिस्ट्री की त्यांच्याकडे रूम्स कशा आहेत, ते थोडं आयसोलेशन मध्ये राहू शकतात का, आणि त्यांच्याकडे फॅसिलिटीज काय आहेत आजूबाजूला. तर आम्ही आमचे 2 बेबीज असे पॉझिटिव्ह जे होते, आफ्टर अबाउट 14 days ऑल्सो we have to take an undertaking from them. We have to share our phone numbers with them, take their numbers and keep a daily follow up with them. So ideally they should have a separate room where the mother and baby can stay, and they should have a separate washroom available. आता बऱ्याच वेळेस जेव्हा कंटेनमेंट एरियाज मधले जी लोक असतात त्यांना या फॅसिलिटीज आर नॉट अवेलेबल at their home. So there is another option that we can shift both of them to the COVID care center and be in touch with the doctors over there who can handle them, and the swabs need not be done. After that, after the 10th day, if the baby is feeding well, gaining weight, there are no symptoms, there is no point in repeating the test again and again. We don't treat the test, but we will look at the baby and then decide. In our hospital, we are doing one test at birth just to see whether there is any transplacental transfer which has occurred. We are also testing the umbilical cord and the placenta, etc. But that is purely for academic and research purpose. But otherwise, a day 5 swab, which is negative or positive, will decide what action you can do. So this is as far as Sassoon is concerned.
Hello?
But you can have your own guidelines made.
Can I speak?
मॅडम, माझा प्रश्न असा आहे की मॅडम, आपण टेस्ट न करता बेबीला पाठवतोय घरी. इफ आठवड्यात 2-3 बेबी दुसरी टेस्ट पण पॉझिटिव्ह आल्यात, 10व्या दिवशी 14व्या दिवशी बेबी पॉझिटिव्ह आल्यात, तर तशा बेबींना पाठवण्यामध्ये रिस्क आहे. कारण काय की ही मुलं मास्क वापरत नाहीत, आयसोलेशन शक्य नाही त्यांना, ती मुलं एकमेकांशी खेळणार आणि दे मे स्प्रेड इन्फेक्शन टू अडल्ट. आणि सगळ्यात महत्त्वाचं ते घरी गेल्यानंतर आजीला चिकटणार. आजी म्हणजे सगळ्यात ससेप्टेबल आहे ना.
So that is why the person who is sending them home has a very great responsibility. The other option is send them to the COVID care center.
Okay.
And we have a designated Sonaune hospital over here. So once baby and mother are stable but they are positive, we are sending them to that hospital also. So we have some options here. If you have options like this, you can make an option like this.
Options are there, madam. Options are there. But माझा प्रश्न असा आहे की टेस्ट करणं अपेक्षित आहे किंवा नाही. टेस्ट करणं नसेल तर
there is no need to test. Don't test unnecessary. No. You have ICMR support guidelines for that.
Thank you, madam.
कुठून सर? कोणाला बोलायचं?
देऊन टाका. प्रचंड बोलले. लाभार्थी सध्या
ज्यांनी ज्यांनी बंद केलं जाऊ दे. सगळे बंद केलेले जाऊ दे लगेच.
Any other question?
So before we end the VC, if there are any questions, let us know. Otherwise, we can thanks to everybody, and we can somebody from NHM.
मॅडम
Yes.
हा मॅडम, आजकाल होम आयसोलेशन गाईडलाईन्स जेव्हापासून सुरू झाल्या आहेत त्या मदर्स सुद्धा असिम्टमॅटिक मदर्स ज्या जस्ट डिलिव्हर झालेल्या आहेत पण पॉझिटिव्ह आहेत, त्यांना जर होम आयसोलेशन त्यांनी प्रिफर केला तर आपण न्यूनेटसाठी प्रोफिलॅक्टिक काही अँटीबायोटिक अँटीव्हायरल वगैरे द्यावं का रुटीन ज्या गाईडलाईन्स आहेत त्याच ऍडवाइस कराव्या, अथवा होम आयसोलेशन ज्या न्यूनेट पॉझिटिव्ह आला आहे असिम्टमॅटिक आहे तर त्याला होम आयसोलेशन ऍडवाइस करावं का?
See, when you isolate anybody at home, you can do it provided they fulfill certain criteria. Okay, so the mother has to be educated what she has to look for in the baby. So if the baby has any, like how we used to do it for our IMNCI, some danger signs. So explain all those things to them that this is what you are supposed to look at, and the baby should be breastfed with these precautions. So she has to wear a mask. She has to make sure that the baby is not coughed on. So all the hygienic measures, etc., all those, if you are sure that they can maintain everything, lot of counseling is required, and it is a better place. Home is a better place rather than keeping them in the hospital surrounded by positive patients, adults. So
Any prophylactic medicines, madam?
No prophylactic medicines for the baby, because
Okay,
baby is asymptomatic. So we will not expose the baby. Only if they are symptomatic, and if you want to start anything, it will be in the hospital. So no medications. Okay. You can just continue the usual multivitamins if you are wanting to give them. Okay?
Okay, madam. Thank you, madam.
तिकडे कोणतरी आहेत का शीतल वगैरे ते हात केलेले कोण आहेत? दुसरा एक शीतल म्हणून आहे.
Hello.
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 Hello. Yes.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Dr. Arshad is speaking. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, yes, very clear.
There is any benefit of doing C-section in COVID positive mother, or we do normal delivery?
One of the thing, if the mother is positive, when you are exposing the mother to undergo a normal delivery, there is going to be a
आवाज नहीं आ रहा है.
ऐकू येते का? But Dr. Harshad, can you listen, hear us?
Hello.
Hello, Arshad, can you hear us?
Can you hear us? Hello? Dr. Arshad, can you hear us?
Dr. Harshad, I am Dharmarao from Eco India. I think there are two systems in your room. You have to mute one and you have to speak one, otherwise it is echoing. Or anybody is nearby is open.
Yes. Yes. Now I am here.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I can hear.
Okay.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Network issue. ओके, तोपर्यंत ते धर्माराव म्हणून त्यांचं घ्यायचं का?
मॅनेजर.
Hello.
ऐकतोय का? Okay, Arshad.
Yes, I can hear, ma'am. I can hear.
I'll tell you, one of the view is that if you do a cesarean section and you get the baby out fast, there is less chance of the baby getting exposed. But it depends on whether the virus has traversed the placenta and gone into the amniotic fluid. Okay, and the second is because the normal delivery may take time, there is more time of exposure of the baby to the maternal secretions. And if they are present positive, there is a chance the baby is likely to get infected, because while passing through the passages, they get more exposed to the blood and the secretions rather than cesarean. So there is a general tendency that if there is a positive confirmed case and you are planning a cesarean, that is the tendency towards which the obstetricians are going, but some of them are going for normal deliveries as well. So there might be some benefit with the cesarean section, but we can't say for definite.
Can't hear anything. Hello, can't hear anything.
I'll just add something.
Okay, ma'am.
So
Thank you, ma'am.
Initially, when COVID started in China, so they delivered all mothers by cesarean section. So there was no normal delivery happening if the mother was COVID positive in China. Then later on, people started questioning, is there really vertical transmission happening? What is the chance that the baby will get infected if delivered vaginally? And the cases of true perinatal transmission are very rare. It's not common at all. So now many obstetricians say that if there is an obstetric indication, go ahead and do cesarean section. But suppose there is no obstetric indication, just because the mother is COVID positive, you don't need to do cesarean section. So that is probably a balanced view that people are coming to now. Okay. So that is to answer your question. So initially, there was a lot of enthusiasm for cesarean section. In China, initially they delivered everybody by cesarean section. There was no normal delivery. But now people are delivering both by cesarean section and depending on the mother's obstetric parameters. So that is what it has come to now.
Okay, good. Thank you, both of you, sir. I am very much. Thank you.
Hello, madam. Good afternoon. Hello. Hello.
Yes.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, you can ask the question, sir.
Madam, most of the time the mother is negative and the baby is positive, and the age of the baby is between 6 months to 1 year, and we cannot keep the baby with the staff, and we have to allow the mother inside the COVID care center. So at the end of 14th day, when we are discharging the baby, are we supposed to test the mother? Because mother, it's not possible for a mother to wear PPE full 24 hours and take care of the baby. The baby is going to sleep with the mother. Here in Hingoli, we have got almost 40-46 cases less than 10 years of age, out of which few cases were between 6 months to 1.5 years of age, where we have to keep deliberately the mother with the child, and the mother was negative. So at the end of treatment, should we test the mother before sending home?
No, actually what we are doing right now, the mother is the caretaker. So we do not... So the mother and the baby stay together. The mother is given an N95 mask to wear when she's around, but she doesn't wear the PPE. And if she's asymptomatic at the end of 14 days at the time of discharge, we are not testing the mother. Okay, but we are counseling her that if she becomes symptomatic, she's supposed to come. So we are not doing any testing routinely that you have stayed with the baby for 10 days, for 14 days, now you're going home and you should be checked. And we are not doing it, and none of our mothers or caretakers have had any issues after discharge also. So you can just keep a watch on them and explain to them about it, the signs and symptoms which they should look for. Does that answer your question?
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, madam. Thank you.
Dr. Otiv, madam, has asked a question. Can we put it in the chat box?
Indication of steroid and interleukin.
Yes. Indication of steroid and
So I think Dr. Madhumati Otiv madam has asked this question. comment on use of or indication of steroids and interleukin levels. Now, ma'am, interleukin 6 levels we are not doing. It is not available to us. Steroids we used in one baby, only one baby who died, the 11-month-old baby who died, and although the British the British data says steroids are useful, dexamethasone is useful. I think practically the pediatric experience is extremely limited to recommend or not to recommend. So we still don't know if steroids should be used or not. I think it will be extremely individualized decision that we have to take. But in the one patient where we used steroids, we lost the child. And about, I think, critical patients, about 12 we have managed so far. In the other patients, we have not used steroids in any of the patients. So only for one patient we used because that child progressed rapidly to ARDS. And in the hope of preventing that rapid progression, we used methylprednisolone. But there was no obvious benefit, at least in that child. So to answer your question, at present, there is inadequate data to say whether we should use it or not. I think it will be very, very individualized decision. There is no data, pediatric data as such is very limited. And to answer this question, I think there's hardly any data internationally or nationally. So this will be a very individual decision. Interleukin is not available for us yet. But Sassoon is planning to make this test available soon. I think in the next few days, we will have IL-6 levels also done. Thank you.
There is one more question which is related to chances of COVID to be transferred to delivery ANC. How can it be? Yeah, we spoke about it. So any other questions? IL-6 levels, Dr. Otiv, in the adults, they are doing it before giving tocilizumab. And in Sassoon, right now, they are getting the kits. So maybe in the next week or so, the levels will be available to it. But primarily, they have kept that test for those who are enrolled into the study for tocilizumab, if the patient is going to go on it. Okay. And we had the 10 years ago when we had our H1N1, that time
Hello. 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 Someone else is speaking. Hello. Hello.
Yes.
Hello. Can you hear me, sir? Hello. Hello.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, we can hear you.
Hello.
Who is it? Can you identify yourself, please, so that... Okay, yeah. Kindly please cut off.
Hello. Hello.
Age limit to?
To give or not to. Lower limit.
Hello.
Yes, yes, go ahead.
I can hear you.
Hello.
I can hear you, yes.
Galaxy wale. You can identify yourself.
ठीक है जाओ मग अनम्यूट करा
करू शकतो ना Yes sir, we can hear you.
हाँ, मैं डॉक्टर ढोले बात कर रहा हूँ अकोला से. हेलो.
Yes sir, you can speak sir.
हाँ, मेरे को ना एक क्वेश्चन है कि जैसे अभी न्यूनेट्स है.
Go ahead.
हाँ, तो न्यूनेट में कैसा है कि मोस्ट कॉमन कॉज ऑफ एडमिशन उनका डिस्ट्रेस ही रहता है. रेस्पिरेटरी डिस्ट्रेस है या मेकोनियम एस्पिरेशन है, एस्फिक्सिया है. और सेकेंडली अगर साइमल्टेनियसली बाय कोइंसिडेंस इसका मदर अगर कोविड पॉजिटिव है और बेबी भी अगर कोविड पॉजिटिव आया तो इट इज वेरी डिफिकल्ट टू.
What happened? कुठले होते ते अकोल्याचे होते.
तो इसमें कैसा डिफरेंशिएट कर सकते हैं इन न्यूनेट्स? देयर इज नो केस लाइक दिस बट एक थ्योरेटिकल डिस्कशन की क्या कर सकते हैं इसका आइडेंटिफिकेशन के लिए.
See, during the pandemic, one of the things which they have suggested is planning. So when you are planning, depending on your workload, if you can segregate and make two places available, one is for the non-COVID and the other one is for COVID, you can independently manage these babies so that there is no mixing which occurs. You are more worried about the mixing. So if your facility has this place that they can be in two places, two rooms, different rooms which are at a distance, and you have separate staff, I think there is no worry. But if that is not possible, there will always be a risk of transmission from one person to the other, as well as the healthcare workers and doctors. They also can transmit infection. And their strict hand washing, isolation, etc. become, so those are basic care. Okay? Does that answer your question? म्यूट केला बस ठीक आहे दुसरा ते क्लिअर झाला का बरं ठीक आहे आता कोणी हात वर केलाय का So shall we wind up? So if there are no more questions, then we will wind up the session. And I once again thank all of you for being there for the session. Okay. Yes, yes.
Hello.
Bolo.
Hello, madam. I'm speaking from Pune, DH Pune.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Of course. Yes, yes. Go ahead.
Actually, routinely, if the mother is positive, we are doing COVID testing of the baby within 48 hours. And so I wanted to know, is day 5 optimum or can we do within 48 hours?
Okay. See, we initially were doing it within 24 hours, like at birth also, because that was what we were doing for a study to see transplacental transfer or baby infected in utero. But now we have changed it and now we take the swab, but the one which decides discharge or everything is day 5.
Actually, we have 3 or 4, we have kept 3 or 4 warmer for these suspect babies. Yes. So if we take swab on day 5, then the turnover time will be increased.
Yes.
So we get so many babies, there will be a technical problem of keeping so many babies for 5 days in suspect ward.
Yeah, the recommended period is from 3 days to 5 days.
Okay, because once the report comes negative, we can shift that baby to the other unit.
Yes. So depending on your workload, if you are doing it between the 3rd and the 5th day, it is fine.
Okay.
But also look at the baby and look at the symptoms, etc. All those things. Okay, before you shift. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. If the child is Archana.
So one question is for doxy and hydroxychloroquine, is there any age limit to use? Now doxycycline, we have been taught that below 8 years you have to use with care. But I think certainly if it is used for 5 days, there should be no concern of this discoloration of teeth, etc. So it is extremely safe. We have used it in as young as 6 months old children. Same with hydroxychloroquine. Officially, FDA does not give permission to use it in children, hydroxychloroquine. So it is, out of experience that we are using it. But for malaria prophylaxis, hydroxychloroquine has been used in young children. So biologically, if we can use it for malaria prophylaxis, I'm sure we can use it for treatment of COVID also. Not in newborns, probably neonatal age group, we should not use hydroxychloroquine. But in little older children, I think we can use it. The second answer question is cutoff of QTC interval. So anything above 450 milliseconds, 0.45 seconds will be prolonged, and you will be very, very careful if you are using anticonceptives that increase the QTC interval. The third question is if the child is having wheezing or distress and COVID is available, we can't use nebulization, what to use? It is proven beyond doubt that MDI is as good as nebulization. Very, very rarely you use to use nebulization. With MDI, you can manage most patients. But if it is absolutely essential to give a nebulization, you can give a nebulization. by taking precautions. If the patient is taking nebulization, don't stand next to the patient, even wearing an N95 mask, because aerosolization will happen. If it is absolutely necessary life-saving, you can nebulize, but otherwise FDA is as good as nebulizer, that is true. Role of favipiravir and remdesivir in COVID-19. I think no pediatrician has experience using both these drugs. Remdesivir in USA they have used in few pediatric patients, but it is very limited experience, so we cannot recommend yet. But I think as the number of cases increase and the drug becomes familiar, we'll be more confident. Just like oseltamivir in 2009 was an alien drug. Today we have a lot of experience using oseltamivir. Same thing will happen with remdesivir.
There is one question about outborn newborn babies admitted in our hospital. Is it good to do a swab test of babies as we don't know mother's COVID status? Now, at present, if the hospital from where the patient is being referred to you, if they are following ICMR guidelines, they should have done the testing before delivery. But many times mothers come in labor and they deliver. So if you have a history that the mother is from a containment area or is a high risk area where mother is likely to be positive, then you can do it. The other thing is, because the mother is not from a high risk area, etc., then you can do it if you are going to put the baby into your neonatal ICU. If you have a separate place, by the time you take all this history and you know the mother's report, you can look after the baby in a separate room, not mix with your other babies if that facility is available. But as a routine, rather than doing the baby's swab, you can do the mother's swab. That will be a better option, because ultimately the mother also will be staying with the baby in your NICU or in your baby room. Because right now it is mandatory to do all the pregnant mothers swabs, and we are getting a lot of asymptomatic mothers also who are coming positive. Okay. When do you expect the peak in Pune? Vacancy in hospitals in Pune. There are 2-3 things about the peak in Pune. First, we were told it will be in July. Then it went into August, and then somebody did some mathematical calculations, and now they have told us November. But if we look at the cases load which is coming, it is little less. I can say little less, but after the lockdown that has been opened up now, the positive cases, younger age group adults are now coming in more than what we used to see before. Okay, there is whether we can get written guidelines and protocols for pediatric internet range losses.
They want the written guidelines.
Okay, we will share it. Okay, Dr. Suchitra has asked, no, that was before. If COVID test of mother is negative before 14 days of delivery, then should baby be tested after delivery? Now, this negative report before 14 days of delivery, actually the guidelines tells us within 5 days before delivery. So in the 14 days where all the patient has been, and after delivery, if the mother is going to be tested as a routine in that hospital, there is no need to rush and test the baby. You can wait for the mother's report to come, because the ideal age for the baby would be 3 to 5 days if you really want it to be coming positive or negative. Anything else? I don't know whether I answered it, Dr. Suchitra. Any other questions? Internal range losses. Breast milk testing.
Only for research.
Only for research purpose. Don't use it as a routine. Okay. We did it only only for checking.
Hello.
Yes.
Can you hear me, madam? I'm from Jalgaon.
Yes, please go ahead.
Madam, a lot of the times I'm missing in range. I don't know whether the topic is covered or not. if the mother is delivered, admitted is suspected, baby is delivered, we repeat swab on day 1, and if mother swab is negative, do you require to repeat on the day 5?
No, no. If the mother's report by that time has come negative, then we don't repeat for the baby.
Negative.
Okay, that is one condition. Now, suppose the mother's test
Okay,
comes
madam.
positive after delivery.
Then we repeat, definitely. We repeat.
Then yeah, then it is a different issue.
No, madam. The second. Thank you. Second question is there. If the
Yes.
newborn is admitted with us and all the relatives are quarantined, hospital quarantine for the as a suspect, or some are the positives, and
Yes.
baby is planned for discharge after second swab day 5 negative,
Yes.
and the relatives or recipient is not there, what can be done for that child?
Yeah, so what there's one option is that we look after the baby, or there are certain orphanages whom you can approach through the medical social worker, and they provide with caretakers, provided they are ready. Such organizations are ready. But in our case, we have managed them, and we keep on counseling the relatives to send somebody. But until then, it is the nurses and the doctors who are looking after. Sometimes as much as 8 days also we have managed them, but gradually somebody comes from the home. Because most of them are also quarantined, and there is a fear factor also.
Okay, madam. I would like to ask one more question, please. In 200 bed COVID exclusive COVID hospital bed, what the pediatric setup is expected to be there by minimum beds? What expected to be one?
Yes, so what we have done is we have kept requirement as 10 beds. 10 beds, okay, and the isolation one which we have kept is another 10 beds after they settle down. And we have 4 ventilatory beds, but the 10 beds can be converted into ventilatory beds if required.
Okay, madam.
Okay.
Yeah, madam. Yes. Whether the suspect peoples are working in the same setups will able to attend the in positive, or they have to be kept in different ways?
We are having 2 different floors for suspect and for positive. So there are different areas. Different areas have been designated for suspect and for positive. So if your hospital has that facility, then there will be no mixing. Okay, so suspected separate. There is one, is it guideline that yes? I think so. We have reached about 4 o'clock or so. Okay, the last question I will rapid antigen testing should we do in pediatric practice since it is approved? We have got certain guidelines from our directorate that we could use rapid antigen testing. Right now the advantage of it is that you will get the result within 15 minutes. So a decision could be made, but what our microbiologists have said that if it comes positive, they would be doing a CB-NAT, which will come in about 45 minutes, and that would be taken as confirmatory. So the rapid antigen is more for administrative purpose because it needs to be backed by the RT-PCR or at least CB-NAT. But I think so it will come in practice soon because it reduces the time. Otherwise, for the normal COVID test to come RT-PCR, it takes about minimum 7 to 8 hours. And the CB-NAT is 45 minutes to an hour. And the antigen test is around 15 minutes. So once it has been approved, but it's not yet used in practice.
Can you hear me, madam? Hello.
If you have any further questions, you can get in touch with us
Hello.
personally. Is that okay?
Sir, if you have any question, you can
Yes.
ask directly to ma'am personally.
Can we get number, please?
Yes. You want to write it down?
Or you can add in chat.
Just
Can we get number, madam's number, cell number?
put it there.
98
500.
500.
Hello.
Oh, sorry.
98
98 500
98900.
0 नहीं double.
हाँ sir, 98900.
This is not
54.
Shall I okay. Yeah.
Can everybody hear me? It is 98500 390 60.
98500 390. Next.
My number is 9224
9224
799
799
523.
799. Next.
523. It is there in the chat box.
5.
It is there in the chat box. You can copy from the chat box.
Okay, sir. Okay. Sir, whether we are getting a written protocol like that previous has been given, that will be more useful. And thanks for arranging everything for updating this.
We'll share protocol, okay?
Kinikar madam and Kulkarni sir number is mentioned in the chat box. Thanks.
Okay,
sorry. Thanks Kinikar madam, and thank you sir for having such a wonderful session. Hopefully we will have such a type of session in the future. One thing which I wanted to mention, that guidelines related to the management of newborn in SNCU, we issued this on 20th of June, but 7 annexures were missing in that. So just a day before, means on 22nd June in the evening, we already issued the guidelines which included those 7 annexures. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you everybody.
Thank you, madam. Thanks all team to arrange a wonderful session for us to updating. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Okay.